76, Azaleos.
Okay, I think, yeah, we can go ahead. Is it okay? Okay. Yeah, I hope you can hear me well, first of all. Somebody messaged me that participants cannot hear me. Isabel, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
You can hear me. Okay. Okay, good. So good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, actually, depending on the time zone where you are at the moment. And welcome to this event on circular economy business models in the electrical and electronic equipment value chain. My name is Vasilios Rizos. I'm head of sustainable resource and circular economy at CEPS, and I will be the moderator of this session. Now, just some introductory words. Waste electrical and electronic equipment is among the fastest growing waste streams in Europe. And I think there are various sources, studies and statistics that highlight the magnitude of this challenge. For example, it has been estimated that in 2019, waste generation in Europe reached 16.2 kilograms per capita, and this is actually the highest level worldwide. Now, the good news is that in Europe and over the years, we have actually managed to develop systems for collection and recycling of some of this, or of a share of this equipment at least. And roughly 40% of e-waste in Europe is properly collected and recycled. But still, there are significant quantities of waste that are not treated or they are not collected sometimes. And I think this is a significant challenge, especially for small electronics. Now, a couple of years ago, we estimated that there could be around 700 million mobile phones unused in Europe, which are not collected for recycling. And this means, of course, not only that there are significant environmental issues linked to this issue of not collecting devices, but also a loss of economic opportunities. Now, looking into the market, one can certainly notice a growth of circular economy applications and business models. Now, if you look around in your neighborhood, I'm sure you have seen new repair centers, collection mechanisms, new ways to treat new businesses, treating waste, electronic waste, or reusing this waste. We also see companies implementing eco-design approaches or offering different business models, for example, service and leasing models for electronics. Now, still taking into account the magnitude of the challenge linked to electronic waste, the take-up in the market of such circular economy approaches will need to significantly increase in the coming years. Now, Circ for Life is an EU-funded project that in the past 42 months developed and demonstrated such circular solutions for electronics. And today we will actually like to take messages from the project, combine messages from the project, but also perspectives from external speakers in order really to have a debate on how to boost circularity in the electrical and electronic equipment value chain. Now, before we go ahead, I would just like to give the floor to Professor Daizon Shu, who is from Nottingham Trent University. He's also the Circ for Life coordinator, and he will just say a few introductory words and explanations about the project. So, Professor, I think that your slide will pop up now on the screen. Perfect. You need to unmute yourself, Professor.
Yes. Okay. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. On behalf of the Circle for Life project, I welcome you to this online conference. Our Circle for Life project is supported by the European Commission Horizon 2020 project. As Vasilios mentioned, this is a 42 months project. We are going to finish at the end of October. So now we approach to the end of the project. This project developed 3 circular economy business models: co-creation of products and services, sustainable consumption, collaborative recycling reuse. Those 3 business models covers the whole product life cycle in a circular manner instead of traditional linear manner. The 3 business models demonstrated in 4 industrial areas: LED lighting, including industrial lighting, domestic lighting, recycle reuse, computer tablets, meat supply chain, and vegetable farming. Today, the session will address those 2 areas about electronic aspects. Tomorrow's session will deal with meat supply chain, vegetable farming, It is about agriculture and food. I would like to take this opportunity to thank for presenters for their valuable contribution to this conference. I also look forward a productive debate discussion joined by the audience. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Indeed, as you rightly mentioned, the project covers 2 value chains. And tomorrow, at the same time, we will have a dedicated session focusing on the agri-food value chain. Now, moving forward, just a few words regarding the structure of the event. First, we will start with a contribution, a keynote speech by a head of unit from the European Commission, who will provide an overview of the Horizon programs aiming to support innovation in the circular economy, specifically also on the electrical and electronic equipment value chain. And then we will move to a panel discussion where we will host experts from the project, but also from external speakers, in order to have a debate. And each speaker will have 10 minutes for an initial contribution, and then we will be able to take some questions from the audience, from you. And I guess by now you're all familiar with the functionalities of Zoom. So please use the Q&A function to ask questions throughout the event, and we will try to take as many as possible forward in the discussion. If you would like to tweet about the event, please tweet the project account at Circ4L, which is the Circ for Life Twitter account, but also the SEPS account, which is SEPS_think tank. And we will also try to share and create some content discussion also in social media. Now, with no further delay, I would like to first give the floor to Arnoldas Milukas, who is the head of Unit B3 Biodiversity, Circular Economy and Environment at European Research Executive Agency of the European Commission. So Arnoldas, first of all, thank you for being with us today. There is a new and I would say ambitious Horizon program, and I know many organizations, including some of them that are already participants today, they're working intensively in past few months to prepare proposals. So we really expect your insights about the program and how do you think this can contribute to further boosting circularity in the electronics, but also in other value chains as well.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Vasileios, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Warm welcome to this online event taking place on the first day of the final conference of Circ for Life. I will present shortly EU research, and I know if the.
Are you able to share your screen, Arnoldas, or you would like us to share your slides? Okay, no, it's working.
Yeah, this is yes, this is, I think, okay, fine. So I will present today, let's say, this shortly EU research and innovation framework programs, and they are now better known, so let's say, like Horizon program, both Horizon 2020 and Horizon Europe, and of course, including this support for innovation actions in the area of circular economy. And of course, as mentioned, these programs created many funding opportunities, like the one which supported, Circ for Life project. And allow me to start, let's say, from the very beginning, and published in 2016, the work program for 2016 and 17 of Horizon 2020 included a major initiative called Industry 2020 in the circular economy. And the program granted with this initiative over 650 million euros for this 2-year period, 16 and 17, to support research and innovation with the aim to demonstrate the economic and environmental feasibility of the circular economy approach, and at the same time to give a strong impetus to the re-industrialization of the European Union. And wide range of industrial and service activities were addressed, including process industries, manufacturing, new circular economy business models. And at that time, the aim was, and of course it still remains today, to position Europe as a front runner moving towards a circular economy model and demonstrating on the ground economic and environmental feasibility and benefits of these circular models. Next slide, please. Yes, so Circ for Life so this was, I think, yes, it was supported, let's say, by this circular economy program, and it received funding from the Horizon 2020 call of 2017, together with other 6 projects to work on innovative circular economy business models. And Circ for Life is an international collaborative project with a significant budget, which started, let's say, in the May of 2018 and will end in October this year. And we are happy to see now that this project succeeded and have developed this 3 circular business models with an aim to engage customers, let's say, in transition toward the circular economy. And as presented by Professor Su, it was, let's say, first model of cooperation of products and services, then second model on sustainable consumption, and third model on collaborative recycle reuse. And it was mentioned that, let's say, these models were piloted in 4 product areas. 2 in the sector of electronic and electronic waste, and 2 in the sector of farming and agri-food value chain, for which tomorrow meeting is dedicated. The next slide, please. So in the meantime, the policy landscape changed positively for the circular economy policy. At the same time, the policy itself has developed to higher visibility and priority, and was more and more acknowledged as a key tool for climate change mitigation, which again is another, let's say, policy imperative. And from 2015, with the Sustainable Development Goals and the first Circular Economy Action Plan, we had a number of other EU initiatives or policy actions, like the Plastic Strategy, the Circular Economy Action Plan of 2020, and European Green Deal. And while for the future research and innovation funding, the Commission has put forward the Horizon Europe program, which is direct successor of Horizon 2020. Next slide, please. So regarding, the new Horizon Europe program, it has an overall budget of 95.5 billion for the period from 21 until 27. And in the vision of the program is, let's say, among others, to tackle climate change, to help achieve UN Sustainable Development Goals, to boost the EU competitiveness and growth, to strengthen impact of research and innovation in developing, supporting and implementing new policies, and support for the creation and better diffusion of excellent knowledge and technologies. Next slide, please. Fostering circularity is an important thematic part in the Horizon Europe program. Let's say this circular economy is part of innovation actions, research and innovation action, or coordinating and support action. And there's now triple focus, which has, let's say, 3 main elements: data, materials, team, and territorial approach, meaning cities and regions. Next slide, please. So an indicative list of ongoing circular economy relevant topics in Horizon Europe, let's say cluster 6 work program 21-22 are presented here. So there are topics from 21 and 22, which covers areas of circularity in cities and regions, innovation on packaging and single-use plastics, circularity in textiles, plastics, and electronic value chain. And this topic, of course, may attract an interest of many of you as is in electronic sector. And next slide, please. And complementary, let's say, to the previous list of cluster 6 topics, circular economy projects can be relevant and can apply, let's say, for funding also in the topics in the cluster 4, which has its main focus on industry. And the list of these topics are provided here in the table. And here, I think the relevant topic for the partners of the Circ for Life and their stakeholders would be the highlighted topic, digital tools to support the engineering of a circular economy. This is a research and innovation action. This is from work program 22. So I think where the opening will, let's say, will start, soon. So I would like to wish you the best luck with the future proposals. And next slide, please. And I would like to thank you for your attention. I know that there are a lot of experts and interested participants today anticipating the discussion to come. Therefore, I don't want to delay you any further. And I thank all of you being here and encourage you to engage openly in the constructive exchanges during the next two days. And now I give the floor back to Vasileios, and I'm happy, together with my colleague from the GRTD, Hans Christian Eberl, to give you, let's say, more information if you have any particular questions. So thank you again for your attention. Over to Chair.
Thank you, Arnold. Thank you. This was very useful and certainly a very ambitious program that will cover different areas. Now, I know that Hans Christian is among the participants, so in case he needs to step up, we can bring him in the discussion. We will have Arnold as for us for just a few more minutes. So if you want to ask a question, I mean that's really your chance. So please write it in the Q&A function of Zoom. Now I have personally a question, Arnold, because as part of Sec for Life, as part of the assessment we did, we actually interviewed a lot of companies that they implement circularity business models in the electronics value chain. And then we identified a contrasting trend, let's say. So on the one hand, it appeared that EU funding and projects funded by the European Commission has been for many companies a key enablers. And actually, in many cases, there were companies mentioning that if it wasn't for European funding, they wouldn't have started the new circular approach or business model. Now, on the other hand, there were quite a few companies, and especially smaller ones, that they basically claim that it's very difficult still for them to access funding, despite the prospects and the opportunity being there. They don't have the capacity, the resources, let's say the skills to enter this kind of landscape of European projects. So I was wondering, with this new format of Horizon Europe, if this has been taken into account, if you think that, let's say, it might be easier this time for these companies to apply for such projects, if, let's say, the landscape will be more, let's say, accustomed to the needs of smaller companies and SMEs, taking into account, of course, that there are strict requirements, and there should be strict requirements when you are to acquire funding from European projects.
Yeah, okay, thank you for your question. Indeed, I think, and we try from our side to do, let's say, what we can to kind of to encourage newcomers, especially, let's say, SMEs. But of course, at the same time, yes, we have to acknowledge that, the program has, let's say, specific requirements, and indeed, there's some complex rules. So if somebody wants to participate, I think should be, let's say, ready that there'll be certain, let's say, administrative, let's say, burden, coming together, let's say, with the project. But at the same time, we're doing, let's say, a lot to kind of to simplify, to simplify reporting, including financial reporting. So I hope that, of course, that we will see the results, let's say, after the program is finished. But we are optimistic. And I see that Hans Christian, he would be happy to contribute, let's say, on the current program.
Yeah, I already asked my colleagues to bring him in. Okay, he's there. Hans Christian, if you can turn on your camera and microphone.
It works. There we are. I had to flee to the garage because we have kids at home and it's noisy in the whole house. So I'm hiding in the sort of buyanderie. But don't be distracted by that. I do have things to contribute because I'm just coming from a programming meeting for the next work program 23-24, where I hosted the first co-creation meeting commissioned internally for the circular economy sector. And there we were discussing exactly these things. So how do we continue? Which instruments do we want to renew from 2021 to 23-24, and what are the problems where we can improve, and one thing is clearly that there's a massive barrier for SMEs, but then if you're talking about Horizon Europe funding, you're talking about consortia, and we are talking about, we decided that we want to have large scale deployment of innovative solutions, moving up to higher TRLs. So there's I don't know whether there's so much space for these tiny things. I think there's potential for smaller initiatives within bigger frameworks, and one of these frameworks is maybe the Circular Cities and Regions initiative. So I wouldn't discard the territorial approach completely against the sectoral approach. The two approaches will run in parallel, and I think we all convinced in the policy DGs and in DG RTD that we want to continue with both sectoral interventions and sectoral and territorial interventions. And if you talk about priorities, the priorities are still the same. I mean, the key material flows and the key product value chains, and one is electronics, in the circular economy action plan are there for a reason. It's because of the environmental impact, and it's because of the potential for circularity. So I think we will continue with the same things, and there will be room for more projects there. Simplification for the applications, I don't really see that, but that's an issue that we've been discussing for a long time, and I don't have a simple answer to that. What I see is that interventions in the product value chain, and that includes electronics, maybe not in first place, but yeah, maybe even, will become even more important, because in the policy context that was presented before, as an update, we are now talking about the publication of a package that is focusing on sustainable product policy, consumer empowerment, and verification of green claims. That is now going through the impact assessment board, and there, end this year or early next year, there will be a new package supplementing the circular economy action plan. So this will give even more momentum to what we are doing on research and innovation on these material streams.
Are you talking about new funding programs? Just to clarify this, Hans Christian, when you say new innovation program, are you doing something to bring the results of the projects to the policy debate, like a program, or
no. I don't know whether there will be new funding opportunities, whether there will be more budget. We are still talking about how we split the budget now over 23-24. The budget for these years is basically, the total budget is set. I mean, now it's in negotiations how we divide it between the various clusters and the various intervention areas. But I just want to say that everyone is aware that circular economy is extremely important, that electronics is one of the key material streams, and that we will still have an eye on that. So there will be opportunities. That's what I'm wanting to say. It won't be neglected. It won't be discarded just because we had a project in 21, 22, a call, not a project.
Perfect. Yeah, Hans Christian, I just saw that there was a question popping up in the chat room that comes from Sten Erik from Environment Data, Sten Erik is also partner in Sec for Life. He's asking basically whether functional processes and structures in the area of large-scale ICT waste management demand or require a functional foundation of public process and funding. So whether there should be like funding opportunities, I guess, for such processes. And that should also refer to cross-regional planning and coordination. Now, I saw in the list of clusters, there was a call on digitalization and circularity, if I remember correctly. So I'm wondering if you have something else to add on this. Yeah.
But that was in cluster 4, right? I mean, I think cluster 4 people, that's our industry colleagues with whom we coordinate. And if you read the work programs closely, there are several references, cross-references between cluster 4 and cluster 6. So our industry colleagues in Directorate E are doing a great job. They are really supporting us, and we are supporting them. And they have digitalization, for example, in construction, but also in the whole complex of circularity hubs. They have this as a key tool and as a key target, achieving digitalization in parallel or in alignment with the circularity transition. So I think there are at least 3 main, how do they call it? Not destinations, there are 3 complexes. One is process industry, circular resources in the process industry. One is new ways of building, which is of constructing, which is linked to the whole new Bauhaus thematic. And there's a third one on manufacturing, and digitalization is everywhere there. So I wouldn't be worried. And they even have a higher budget than we have it.
Okay, no, very useful. Now, Hans Christian, just one more question from my side. And I saw in the list of basically calls or clusters in Arnolda's presentation, there was one dedicated on metrics and indicators for measuring the circular economy transition. Now, you are in this debate for a long time, so you know this is, whenever you speak about the circular economy, we always discuss about metrics. Where are the metrics? I mean, what do we measure? There's this kind of a question marks always. And in the circular economy action plan, there is basically, the Commission has announced that they will develop some new indicators on resource use and including consumption materials footprint. I was wondering, I'm not sure if you have the answer on this, whether this work that will be done as part of Horizon Europe will be linked with the work that is to be done on the circular economy action plan and with the monitoring framework of circular economy. And generally, if you have any views in general of what we should expect concretely from these calls and metrics, are we talking about like new indicators and metrics? Are we talking about like consolidating existing knowledge, because there's already quite a lot of knowledge? Anyhow, any kind of insights on this question?
No, you're saying. You're saying it already. It's I would see it more as consolidation of existing knowledge. And strengthening what we already have. I mean, we all agree in discussions, yeah, we need a life cycle perspective in all our assessments. We need to base everything on the product environmental footprint. But it's not just about spreading the word. There's also some things that are not clear yet. So it's really a consolidation exercise. And the thing that you mentioned is not a research and innovation action or innovation action. It's a procurement. So it's basically a small series of studies that we will do, and of course this will feed back into the whole work under the circular economy action plan. So I think that's the first programming cycle where we have really a close interaction and positive feedback loops with the policy DGs to an extent that wasn't there before, if you're honest. I mean, we have still a need to align our cycles, because I mean, studies can deliver results pretty fast, but with innovation actions, you will have the results in 5 years time, and in the meantime policy moves on. So that is still a problem, but we are getting there. We're getting much better there.
Okay. No, very good. And Hans Christian and also Arnoldas, I mean, thank you both for your time. It was very useful. I mean, I guess there will be a lot to be discussing in the coming months and years as well. I hope you found it useful as well. So yeah, I mean, thank you for your time today, both of you. And I guess now we can move to the panel discussion. And yeah, you can switch off your cameras. You can stay or you can leave if you want.
Well, I will certainly leave the garage and tell the kids that they shut up. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Arnoldas. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Excellent. So yeah, just a quick reminder, please use the Q&A function to ask questions throughout the webinar and throughout the speaker's presentation. Now we have with us Karin Wilson and Hannah Linden, who are researchers, both researchers and project managers at the Rice Research Institute of Sweden. So Karin and Hannah, yeah, first of all, thank you for taking the time to present your work. I mean, I know in the past 42 months, there was a lot of work done in the background. Circle4Life had this ambition of developing and demonstrating some circular economy business models. And I think that even though work started 4 years ago, actually many of our messages are very much relevant to the current policy debate. So what lessons can you share for us? What would you like to know? And what are the key insights from the project?
Do you see the presentation, Karin?
Perfect. If you can put it in full screen as well.
Yeah. No, it takes some time. My computer is slow. It's probably so much work from the project here. I'm Karin Wilson from Rice Research Institute of Sweden, and I will present this lessons learned from the project Circle4Life together with my colleague Hannah, and she will finish the presentation. I will start. First, you have a slide with all the different new developed circular economy business models. And you have heard the names before: co-creation of products and services together with the customers in workshops and other ending up with the demonstration. It's very important in the beginning. And then we have the collaborative recycling and reuse, which is to extend the life cycle of the products through reuse and repair, or to avoid new material extraction by recycling the business. And then we have the last one here, is the sustainable consumption, is to understand the consumers' desire and to adapt this practice in the companies. And we will show what we have learned during the project. And to support this, we have developed an ICT platform. And one important tool here is the Circle4Life app, which is designed to encourage the customers to reuse and recycle their mostly in this small electronic devices, and using the eco count in the app to register their sustainable actions. And the app includes then eco cost. When you buy something, you get eco costs, the environmental impact of purchasing something, and eco credits when you give it back the device for reuse or recycling. And also an important here a tool is the incentive scheme to encourage different citizens to sustainable by either financial incentives like discounts or donate to a tree planting. Could be something other non-financial, but it's also important. The rest of the presentation is what we have learned from these circular economy business models. They are going to overlap the lessons learned, but it's more specific for the electronic and electrical sector. But also some general conclusions could be valuable in all sectors. But we focus on the implementation of the CBMs, not the technical ones, even if that's also important to bear in mind. And the three companies in the electrical and electronic sector is Ona first, who had developed a modular lamp. This is a quick review of what they have demonstrated in the business models. They have designed the modular lamp with industrial scrap material based on the consumer's feedback. They have also put information on the environmental impact of the lamp gained by life cycle assessment on their online shop. And they have developed a take-back system for their lamp and how they can give discount on the purchase depending on the status of the lamp. And then we have Cosmic, who has also developed a modular lamp for industrial use. So it's a LED light also from feedback and workshops with customers and companies. And this modular lamp has much better environmental impact. Also, they have learned this by doing this life cycle assessment. And the last companies is the Indumetal and Recyclia, who has used the intelligent bin you see on the picture here, put it on several places, including schools, to increase the collection of small electronic devices for reuse and recycling. And they have also developed this business model on recycling and reuse with incentive schemes and to raise awareness and getting preferences on how you look at reused or refurbished electronics. And now I hand over to the rest of the lessons more learned. This was the more general, to Hanna. Welcome.
Thank you, Karin. So within the SIG for Life project, we have then together with the project partners identified key learnings and takeaways from the project. And we saw that it was clear that co-creating and collaborating with stakeholders was perceived as very valuable in the project. And as Karin mentioned, that included workshops, interviews, or other testing activities to receive input and discuss options and to gain valuable feedback and insights from stakeholders. And these co-creating activities were relevant, for example, for understanding customer preferences, to include stakeholder input in product development, and for company relationship building with actors in the supply chain. And one example there of co-creating activities and what that can result in was for Indumetal and Recyclia, where it was apparent that users appreciated also non-financial incentives in the incentive scheme for reuse and recycling. So that was why the tree planting option was developed. And this also brings us to the second point, that when you try to implement the circular economy business models, there's a need to also adapt to the specific stakeholder setting, which is partly done through the co-creation, but also of gaining understanding of who are your stakeholders and what are their needs. For Cosmic, for example, that implied that when they were searching for how to communicate the environmental assessment data of their products, they realized that putting labels on the products was not maybe the most relevant for their situation. Rather, they developed an information sheet on the environmental assessment that is part of their regular product product proposal process, which meant that they had a good way of discussing and communicating with their wholesalers in a way that they are used to. Thank you. Yeah, so for the environmental assessment that I just mentioned, as Karin said, this was done through life cycle assessment in the project, or LCA, which is a quantitative assessment of environmental impact through the product life cycle, with the possibility then of identifying hotspots of environmental impact that one can focus on improving, which can be used, for example, for product development, but also for communication and to gain a deeper understanding of sustainability aspects related to your product or production. So the relevance of using LCA was also key learning perceived as very, very important by all the industry partners. Yeah, thanks. So yeah, regarding product development, as Karin said, we have in this project in this sector, 2 producing companies of LED lights, and they developed then modular lamps as part of getting feedback also from different stakeholders. And the relevance of using modular lamps is, for example, that they are much more easy to repair. It facilitates for remanufacturing, and you use much less resources in the process of producing these lamps. So that's also a learning from this project, that they found that very valuable. So we've seen in this project also a need to have continuous dialogue with users, not to lose their engagement. And as an example, both in the ONA case and in the Indumetall and Recyclia case, there's a possibility to develop in the project to return devices, and then the users can receive an incentive. However, the incentive is then dependent on an assessment of the return device. So it's important then to remain in contact with the user and inform about when the assessment is conducted, hopefully within a short time frame, in order then not to lose this engagement with the users. And what was seen also in this assessment of return devices was that they could be used for some of them for reuse and others for recycling, but there were also some practical difficulties with the reuse part, for example, related to the state of the device. It might be too broken for being used for reuse, or too old, for example, to have systems that support reuse of the device. Or it could be related, for example, to restrictions of unlocking the device, which means maybe then more downcycling of the products, which can be an issue to identify. Finally, we see that this communication and awareness campaigns prove to be also very important, both in engaging stakeholders like customers and companies in this strive for facilitating more sustainable behaviors, but also to inform current and potential customers about the sustainability performance of products and their sustainability actions that might be possible, but also to educate, for example, students. And as we've seen that to generate new behavior can take some time, and therefore this continued communication and awareness campaigns proves more and more important. So with that, me and Karin would like to thank you for listening to these insights from the Circular Life project.
Thank you, Hannah and Karin, and certainly we'll get back to some of these achievements because I have also some questions myself. And you discussed about an app, so I guess if a participant now has an Android device, they can download the Circular Life app, and at least they can see its functionalities, right? If I'm not mistaken. Of course, this is it is not you cannot use it wherever you are at the moment, but at least it's something that we have tested at a small scale in Spain. So there are some certainly messages and some issues I would like to get back later. But now I will move to Ronja Solz, who is our next speaker, and Ronja is service designer and research fellow at Fraunhofer. Ronja is doing very interesting work on circular design, specifically in eco-design, and she's involved in various different projects. So she will present the perspective of this person of the work you're doing in general at Fraunhofer on designing for circularity. So Ronja, thank you for taking the time for being with us today, and we look forward to your contributions.
Yeah, thank you for being here. I hope you can see my screen because I can't see you now anymore, but yeah. Yeah, so about why I'm here today and speaking. So in my background is industrial design, and I've been working a lot in ecologic design. And I joined Fraunhofer and the TU Berlin for the project of the Eco Design Circle 4.0, which is a project also EU funded, where it was about designing tools and methods that help designers, but also everyone involved in the development process of new business models and new products to use design thinking, business model innovation, and life cycle assessment tools to really come up with new ideas of how to build circular products and business models and services. And I'm going to talk a little bit about why that's so important. So, as we already heard, we're creating a lot of e-waste, with this expected to even raise and double in the next 10 years. And while we're doing this, we're throwing away a lot of value. As it was stated, in 2019 only, we threw away $57 billion in gold, copper, silver, and platinum, which doesn't even touch on the more rare earth and materials. But we're not only throwing away this material, mainly we're throwing away a lot of economic value, as you may be aware. Because on the way when a product is produced, we are creating impacts, emissions, pollution, but also use a lot of economic values such as manpower, brain power, IP. So it doesn't really make sense to throw away all this value that we just created. And as you are probably aware, in the circular economy, we try to keep every material, every product, every component at its highest value. And therefore, for me as a designer, is quite a no-brainer that we have to design differently. And design is really crucial in the beginning, because if I want to make a product repairable, it needs to be designed differently. But when we come to on how a product is actually used, it's even more important to think about the services and service design, because so far the user has been kind of a black hole. And as Hannah also pointed out, it's really important to stay in contact with the user all over the use time and even longer. Because if I design a product for repairability, but then I don't know what's happening and the user doesn't know what to do with it, then it will probably end up in trash again, because no one knows that's repairable or how to get the spare parts. So service design can really help us to close this gap or the loop and design services around so that the user actually knows what to do with the product. It can also inform people about updates and so on and so on. And why is this so important? We've done the lifecycle assessment for Fairphone, and the Fairphone is, you probably know it all, it's designed in a modular way, so perfectly for repair. But this modularity actually increases the footprint. And the Fairphone itself has a worse footprint than a normal standardized standard smartphone on the market, because the connections need a little bit more material and so on. And so it is elementary crucial that someone who has a Fairphone will also repair it, because if it's repaired, then the footprint drops dramatically. But if it's not repaired and it's thrown away in the same time as another smartphone would be, the footprint is even worse. So there, it's really important to use services and to help people, make it repair, make it last longer. And circular design actually is all about like reusing resources effectively. So with the service design, we have the ability to build new ways of use patterns, and we have the ability to build new consumption possibilities and also business models that not only look into, for example, efficiency, but also consider sufficiency and consistency. And what that means is like really trying to use resources at the best. So trying to make more people use one product by, for example, having a sharing business model concept, or building product that lasts really long and in consistency with the world. And there is this one very well studied example of care, which you can also look up in the internet. And it just is one brilliant example, I think, where they replaced all the externalities to one centralized unit providing air conditioning in a tower building. And by this, they could reduce the emissions for cool air by 70%. And that's just by having a new business model. And service design can also help us, because now we just talked about the consumer and the end user. It also helps us to improve everything that's in the background, or in the back end, as we call it. So you can also increase the connections, the data flow, the information in your ecosystem. That means with your business partners and so on. So the one who knows, who collects maybe the spare and the parts, already knows where to put it, and whether it's ready for repair, or whether it needs only a little bit maintenance, or whether it needs to go to the recycling because it's not usable anymore. All this can be organized with like nice service concepts, and therefore we can increase circularity, and therefore efficiency of any system, any eco network, business model, any ecosystem by far. So that's like also kind of designing business models and service design. And I want to give you one example that I stumbled upon while we were doing the research for our project. And I talked to back at the time, circular officer at British Telecom. And he told me this amazing story of how they redesigned the entire ecosystem for routers. And what they did, they looked not only in the router itself, like how to increase efficiency there, but they really looked into the ecosystem of the router. And they discovered that one of the biggest emissions that is created is the delivery on the last mile. So they were thinking of how can we reduce this? And they thought if we make sure that delivery is always happening, then we can already reduce the emissions significantly. And so they said we have to make sure that the router goes through a letterbox so that it's always delivered. And then he discovered that this is actually really like huge project, because then he talked to engineers, and they were like, why should I design a PCB that has the specification of fit a letterbox? They couldn't see the purpose at all. But so it's also about like within the companies, for example, really understanding the bigger purpose and the objective more. And when they finished this and they could deliver this, the routers always on time, they of course increased customer satisfaction by far, because everybody wants to have their router there and not run to the post office or to the neighbors who are on vacation to just not get the internet. But they also reduced the emissions. And then because they make this like ship back idea, not with other routers too, and they got so many routers back that usually what happens is service will always say, like when the router fails, they will just say like, I send you a new one, although they are mainly wrongly programmed by the user. But because it's hard to like explain users how to reset them, they just send out a new one. By getting them back, they could just reset them and send them out again. And that made reduced e-waste and increased, of course, the return rate. But also what happened is they often need those routers where they are installed in bigger systems. They use them, they have to produce C-series or like have a lot of spare parts in stock, because those customers who have big IT systems are like, they need it. And so they didn't have to produce those C-series anymore, and they yeah, and they could just send them the fully working products. And in the end, that saved, as you can see, 253 tons of CO2 and a lot of money. And that's always the interesting part for me, because people always come up like, but what does it cost? And I'm like, if you design circularity in from the beginning on, then it's not more costly, but you will actually really save money. But it's like those opportunity costs that we are now used to spend just like this, and that we don't even see by sending out new routers, that we can actually save. And now I don't have a clue how much time I have left, because I brought you another example, but maybe you tell me whether I can talk about it.
You can spend like 2 more minutes if possible. I mean, this is the last.
Okay. Yeah. So that's another example that we developed together with Scholz and Volkmar, which is a design agency here in Wiesbaden and Berlin. And this is really cool project, because we created those emission sensors that can be carried with everybody who's cycling the city and so on. And Scholz and Volkmar is really interested in creating new business models that help the society to connect data and use data for social problems, but they also really like have this data then ready, which they can use for different business models. And when you get the presentation, you can watch the movie. It's really cool explained. But this is for me like a new idea of creating business models, also bring back to the society and help using data for a bigger, better purpose. So yeah, I think for me, what I learned really in this project is that circular systems are created and create value through collaboration. If we all collaborate within our ecosystem, then we can actually make money by just reducing emissions and increasing even the value for us as customers, for us as users. And yeah, that's really the key, that collaboration within companies, within the network, within what now are silos, is key to really develop those new ways of doing business. And yes, we, as the project, developed a lot of tools that will help you to discover how to redesign business models that like throw up a lot of questions, but also help to develop amazing new answers that help you to really do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ronja, and thanks for this awesome message on collaboration, which actually are aligned with the message that Sec for Life also offers. And I think maybe we will get back later on how to break the existing silos, because of course everything sounds very positive when you speak about the circular economy, and everyone is motivated in the beginning to collaborate, but we still see significant barriers and challenges in collaboration across supply chain. So maybe we get back to these issues later. Now, our next speaker will actually help us expand a little bit the focus of the discussion, and he will present mostly international perspectives on for e-waste, for policies for e-waste management. And we have with us Karen Bark-Bell, who is e-waste officer at the International Telecommunication Union, which is the United Nations Specialized Agency for Information and Communication Technologies. So, Karen, thank you for joining us today and bringing this more, let's say, international perspective on this challenge, which is of course not only for Europe, but it's one of the most significant environmental challenges, let's say, globally. So we look forward to your insights and perspectives.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for the opportunity also to be here. So I'm just going to share my screen. Can you hear me clearly?
We can hear you well.
Fantastic.
And
okay, can you see my screen?
Yes. Maybe you go to full screen mode.
All right. That's, yeah, if I go full screen mode, I think it cuts off slightly. Can you see that?
I think it's good. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So yeah, thanks a lot. So actually, it was very interesting to hear some presentations that had a very kind of technical perspective. And I think here this allows us to transition now to more of a normative overview, let's say, with a policy and regulatory focus. So ITU, where I work, is the UN, United Nations Specialized Agency for ICTs. And within ITU, we have a development bureau where I work, and we focus, one of the items that we focus on is waste electrical and electronic equipment. So my presentation today will talk about our policy and regulatory work in various countries around the world, with an emphasis on extended producer responsibility. Okay, so ITU's mandate in terms of e-waste, just to also make that clear to everyone, is we actually have a high-level conference. We had one back in 2018, where member states actually set global targets by 2023 to increase the global e-waste recycling rate to 30% and to raise the percentage of countries with a e-waste legislation to 50%. Sorry. So actually, these are quite, those that know about e-waste and know the data, these are quite high, high targets. And they were set in 2018, so they're probably a little bit unrealistic now, but we are working our best with member states to improve the situation. So just to recap very quickly, the reason why ITU is also involved in this space. We are encouraging countries to connect to the information society, to increase internet penetration rates around the world. So again, there is this obvious fallout at the end of the life cycle, at the end of use, when this equipment is eventually discarded or no longer used. So as we heard before, e-waste generation, according to the Global E-Waste Monitor, is very high, and actually only 82.6% of that in 2019 was officially documented to be collected or recycled. And actually, one interesting fact is that one interesting fact actually that's not spoken about as much as I think it should be. We hear a lot about the data, about the numbers in terms of the actual quantity of e-waste and what's collected and recycled, but we don't talk a lot about how many countries are actually covered by, or how many countries have a legal system or legal instrument in place that sets obligations on different stakeholders in that jurisdiction to actually manage e-waste. So here on the screen, I've put data from the Global E-Waste Monitor again, which indicates only about 40% of countries in the world have a policy, legislation, or regulation. And within that 40%, we must also remember that policies are not legally binding. And even if you have a regulation in force, it might be absolutely fantastic on paper, but it might not actually be enforced or implemented to the best that it could be. So what has ITU started doing? Well, first of all, we have produced a toolkit for policymakers, for national and local government representatives. We produced this with the World Economic Forum, with financial support from Danida, from the Danish Ministry of Foreign Affairs. This was produced last year. It's been translated into English, French, Spanish, and Arabic. And it provides basically tools for fair and economically viable EPR, and a step-by-step approach to implementing such a system. So EPR being extended producer responsibility. It provides quite a few examples from African countries as well. That was really the focus of this toolkit. And as I mentioned, it provides a kind of step-by-step / timeline approach for developing a national EPR framework. And it also really, it takes into consideration, let's say, the regional harmonization potential, at least on the African continent, where, for example, you have some countries that generate a lot of e-waste, neighboring other countries where they don't necessarily generate so much, but it's still an issue. From the perspective of the toolkit, it indicates that economies of scale and recycling hubs following the regional economic communities that we have in that part of the world is a potential way to boost the collection and recycling of e-waste and to retain the valuable materials within. So I think some of my presentation will actually refer to that toolkit as I proceed. But just to step back more into detail with the actual ITU program itself and the number of countries we're covering at the moment on the topic of e-waste policy and regulation. So we're supporting the Namibian, Malawian, Burundian, Dominican Republic, Botswana, the Gambia, Bahrain, and Mauritania, the governments of all of these countries. Actually, number 7 and 8 at the end, Bahrain and Mauritania, we're still finalizing things. But for all of these countries, we work on the topic of e-waste policy, developing national policies and developing regulations in these countries for e-waste. So we support the governments in this sense, specifically with definitions and scope. So definitions being definitions of stakeholders or actors across the system, which is key for regulation, the scope of the regulation, so that can be anything from how advanced it would be in depicting obligations for EPR or anything else, and also product and product scope, what type of equipment would it include for electrical and electronic equipment. We also work with the governments to help them identify which government agencies actually might also have an important role in this conversation, and we help with outreach to producers. We also hold workshops with these government entities and also between the government and producers. And as I mentioned, we're actually also assisting in the drafting of a policy or a regulation in these countries. And then what we are thinking about doing as a kind of additional phase, as we're getting more and more interest in this work, is to actually start working around national awareness campaigns, especially for producers to share information about the regulations that are coming up and their obligations, and to look into appropriate financing scenarios for the actual system to finance the management of e-waste, and to also look at ways of working with producers to advise on how they could organize themselves in light of the upcoming regulation. So I think the key word that we've identified at ITU in terms of developing regulation is simplicity. It doesn't, regulation shouldn't be too complex. It should start simple. So maybe I'll just quickly read off the checklist there. So what needs to go into a regulation? Clear definitions, clear roles and responsibilities, clear product scope, clear stipulations on enforcement and penalties, detailing of how financing would work, if that is a component of the regulation, and clear stipulations on actually who covers the cost of e-waste management. And also, I apologize for the kind of blurry picture here, but essentially regulation that has a kind of EPR concept within it should be applying meaningful categorization and differentiation. And this is to ensure that, to consider having a categorization based on treatment destination, products that can be more efficient in some cases than one based on the product functionality itself, ensuring balanced competition, enabling awareness and enforcement, ensuring a low burden of administration, as I mentioned, keeping things simple, and facilitating international harmonization. There are lots of good examples of other regulation out there, so really facilitating that level of harmonization. The toolkit actually from ITU also considers different aspects of financing. Some key questions there are like, what are the financing mechanisms to be applied? What are the frequencies of the payments and who is paying who? And what type of financing system should the regulation talk about for the country? Is it a fee or a tax or a levy? Is that on importation, or is that a levy, that a fee that the consumer buys when they purchase equipment, etc., etc.? And then what are the penalties for non-compliance? Will they actually be higher or lower than those fees? And what is the basis of the fees and the methodology to calculate those? So I won't read the table here, but just essentially to talk about a bit more of the organization of producers. there are kind of, let's say, three options really commonly. One is a state-funded model where producers would pay an eco-fee or eco-levy to a designated waste management fund operated by the government. And this is we've seen some of these preferences actually in some of the African countries that we've worked in. The other option is an industry-led monopoly model where producers form a not-for-profit entity that operates, such as a PRO, which is a producer responsibility organization. And the third common approach would be a compliance service provider model, where private businesses provide the services of a PRO for a fee to the producers. Okay, I see that I'm short on time, so I'll just be as quick as possible. Going back to the conversation about simplicity, that's very much linked to definitions. And I've highlighted here, it's quite small on the screen, I think, but I've highlighted the definitions of producer in many of the regulations that exist in draft form or in complete form in countries in Africa. And they're very similar in terms of the definition. It's always along the lines of brand owner, manufacturer, assembler, distributor, importer, the entity first putting equipment on the market, and sometimes even retailer. So I think it's very important that the definition of producers as a collective term, consumers also as a collective, can be bulk, individual, business to consumer, business to business, recyclers and government, that these definitions at least are very clear in the regulation. And along with the definitions, the categories of equipment should also be very clear. ITU is part of the Global E-Waste Statistics Partnership. The Global E-Waste Statistics Partnership is involved in producing the Global E-Waste Monitor. And as part of that initiative, we advocate for covering the 6 categories here that I've put on the screen. And just to finish and to summarize, going back to some of the global products that ITU's program offers on e-waste, as I mentioned, with partners, with the UN Institute for Training and Research, S-Cycle team, we produce the Global E-Waste Monitor under the Global E-Waste Statistics Partnership. We've produced the policy practices for e-waste management toolkit, and we also have an e-learning that we provide to every local and national government entity that we work with in the aforementioned countries that I mentioned earlier on. So I think I'll stop there and I hand back to the moderator. Thank you very much.
Karam, thank you for this contribution. And I think many of the topics that you raised on your presentation, such as extended producer responsibility or definitions, actually we can draw parallels with what is happening in Europe at the policy stage. So maybe this is something we can continue later. In the meantime, just to remind to use the Q&A function to ask questions targeted for any of the speakers that have provided contributions so far. So now we will conclude the round of speakers with Evaristo Garcia, who is project manager at Reciclia. Reciclia brings together key compliance schemes for the management of electronic waste in Spain. So Evaristo, I guess you can provide a perspective based on your work at Sec4Life, but also in general in Spain. What do you think are the key challenges and what lessons can be learned for further boosting circularity in the sector?
Okay, thank you, Vasilios. I'm going to share my screen now. Okay. Can you share? Can you see my screen?
Maybe you can go into full screen mode. Yeah.
Okay. Now, perfect. Okay, so hello everyone. My name is Evaristo Garcia from Reciclia. Reciclia is one of the partners involved in Sec4Life project. We are co-owners of one pilot in Spain for electronics, mainly tablets, smartphones, and IT devices. So I will start from lesson learned in Sec4Life project, and then we will move to challenge, barriers, and opportunities from the we sector in general. So regarding lesson learned from Circle project, many of them has been commented before by Hannah and Karin, but well, in our opinion, public administration support and involvement is critical, is vital to succeed in initiatives in circular economy, initiatives such as Fit for Life. This is one lesson we learned in our pilot. Another one is reuse issues that we face when collecting an intelligent bin. It's not only about hardware issues, damaging the screens, but always also in software restrictions. You can have a smartphone working, but due to some restriction in software such as the obsolete version of the system or whatever, it could be reused. So this is another lesson. Co-creation with end user. It was a very, very good lesson learned along the project. The way you work with end user to get their insights and their opinions and co-create and collaborate with them for the development of the pilot. It was very, very, very interesting in our case. As a result, we developed another incentive, tree planting for end users in this pilot. And finally, the importance of communication and awareness campaign to let the people know all the information about the initiative, let them to participate, to involve in the developments and to raise awareness in end users and citizens in general is another good lesson there during this project. And now, regarding the we challenge, the main challenge of the we value chain in general, I want to start by giving some data about the background and context of the we sector. I'm not going to spend a lot of time because it was mentioned by other panelists. So we sector is one of the fastest growing waste stream nowadays. During 2019, it was generated 53.6 million tons of e-waste. This means 7.3 kilograms per person overall around the world. In Europe, it was 16, as Basilio said in the beginning. And by 2030, it's expected this amount to be 74.7 million tons. So it means 9 kilograms per person. So it's a very, very big challenge. And in this, including in these challenges, we can face, for example, increasing flows of e-waste and increasing targets for collection, reuse, and recycling. This is a big challenge nowadays for companies and all the actors involved in the value chain. Another big challenge is how to be innovative. There are many new business models nowadays regarding value chain, like saving, renting, leasing, that are changing the value chain. So innovation is a very, very big challenge that all the companies and all the actors have to face now and in the future to be successful in circular economy. And also the global population growth and demands of critical materials, critical raw materials. As we know, the global population is increasingly rapidly, so the demands on raw materials and critical raw materials is also increasing, and this is a very, very big challenge, as mentioned by also other panelists, and should be addressed in future in this case. I put another slide regarding challenge. In this case, is specifically for end user trust. That is only another big challenge, because nowadays there are still people who keep the devices at home, especially small IT devices like smartphones and tablets. And the question is why people keep these devices at home. Well, there are at least two reasons for that. The devices still work and might be useful in the future, so the user is still giving it a value, and then they decide to keep it just in case. This is a treasure effect, and this affects to the whole value chain. And the other one is the concerns about personal data and privacy storage in these devices. Nowadays, we usually use smartphones, smartwatches, tablets. All these devices, all this equipment keep our personal data inside, and it's necessary to be clear and transparent about how this data is managed after the end users dispose the waste. This challenge in Seal4Life was addressed by the Seal4Life app. Through the app, the end user could check about where the collection point is, how the personal data is managed in the app, how the process of reuse of recycling is made in the treatment plant, and what incentives they can get and where can redeem these incentives. So this is important, how to manage this issue of end users, the trustability and privacy of end users. Okay, regarding barriers, for me, there are four main barriers. Economic barriers due to lack of funding or invest to transform traditional business models into circular business model. So it's need granting programs and funding programs to overcome this barrier. There are also technical barriers, as I mentioned before, not only regarding hardware problems in reusing, but also with software issues, software restrictions, and obsolescence in the devices. This is also about traditional collections, how to adapt traditional collection of e-waste to keep the devices in the best way to be reused. There are also policy barriers. In some cases, policy barriers are in a local level due to tax restrictions to promote circular economy initiatives, but also there are a lack of policy in some countries, as the Graham mentioned in the last presentation. In 2020, just it's only 78 countries have regulation for e-waste. So there are many countries without legislation regarding e-waste management, and this is a barrier also. And finally, social aspects, social barriers, such as lack of trust in the process, in the reuse and recycling process, but also a lack of awareness in the waste sector in general, in the circular economy sector, and the problem that waste can produce if they don't treat the waste properly. But there are also good news.
If you could conclude in 2 minutes, please.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. There are also good news regarding this topic. There are many opportunities, such as funding programs, like Arnold does clearly present in the beginning of the presentation of the event. And funding programs that the companies and other institutions can benefit from to innovate and to research and implement new business models. And also green markets and green jobs. I'm going very quickly. According to the International Labour Organization, under circular economy scenario, worldwide, 24 million new jobs will be globally created by 2030. Most sectors will benefit from job creation. Only 14 out 173 will suffer employment losses of more than 10,000 jobs. 2.5 million jobs will be created in renewables-based electricity sectors. There are, of course, some sectors very affected, for example, petroleum extraction and refining, with more than 1 million jobs losses. And finally, 6 million jobs can be created by transitioning towards a circular economy, which includes new activities like recycling, repair, renting, and remanufacturing. So there are many opportunities, new business models based on circular economy, with green markets and green niches that can be used to promote circular economy in business and in companies. And finally, I want to finish my presentation with a sentence about circular economy with a very good approach. In my opinion, circular economy is not about one company changing one product. It's also about all the interconnected companies that form infrastructure and economy coming together and rethinking the operating system itself. So thank you everyone for listening, and let's keep for questions.
Thank you, Evaristo, for your perspectives and for closing and for emphasizing in the end the need for shared solution and basically collaboration, which has been said already quite a few times by the participants. So maybe I can just ask now all of the panelists maybe to turn on their cameras while we go through the round of questions. Yeah, Garam, if you can turn it on as well. Okay, excellent. So basically, I mean, let's see how many rounds we will actually manage to go through, but maybe I start with a question for Hannah and Karin, and I think that you discussed in your presentation about the LCA assessment basically as mainly a positive thing, something that was implemented in the project and helped companies, the companies in the project, to actually better understand their environmental impact and where it comes from, but also it helped them providing new ways of communicating to their clients or to their partners as well. Now I have two questions in this regard. First of all, whether there were cases where the companies encountered difficulties in obtaining specific LCA data, whether we actually have encountered some significant gaps in the project, and whether in the future these gaps could be filled maybe by additional research or maybe a message that you can convey regarding the difficulty in obtaining specific data. And finally, we understand that the results of the LCA were communicated to companies and clients. So I was wondering what has been the impact of this. I mean, has it been taken in a positive way? Have you observed in the demonstrations that the clients and consumers responded in a positive way? Because we hear often that the consumers basically have difficulties understanding complex LCA assessments and their results. So while I let you think about the answer, maybe I move to Garam. And I think Garam, you presented a lot of interesting information about extended producer responsibility, and I'm not sure how closely you follow the European framework, but basically in Europe we have a framework, and at the member state level, then there are diverse approaches. So we have, for example, in cases of countries that there's a very rigid framework with one compliance scheme that basically has full control of waste of equipment and the way it's being distributed across the country. Then on the other hand, we have countries that they have a very open market approach where there are many different schemes that they compete on price. But then we hear from companies and also from companies that we interview that this creates difficulties for long-term planning for investment, because if everything is on competition on price, then it's very difficult for companies to make decisions on investment. So I was wondering, we have this diverse kind of landscape in Europe, whether you have any views on how should ideally these EPR systems should be set up in Africa and in the countries you work on, but also if you have any broader messages in general. I mean, do you think that the government should just have a very basic, broader framework and then leave regions or to develop their own schemes? Do you think that there should be strict rules in place, not leaving much room for interpretation? Yeah. While you're thinking on this, I have a question for Ronnie as well. So you mentioned the importance on collecting data, not only for basically designing circular economy models, but also for new service approaches. And we see service approaches becoming really a driver, let's say, for circularity, like the examples you saw in the end for the routers. Now, I know, and we know from Sec4Life, but I know in general from research that sharing data is generally a positive thing, but it's also not easy to convince different partners to do this. And I guess for some of these service models, this is required. So I was wondering, what do you think needs to be done basically to break this, to have an impact on this reluctance, to alleviate this reluctance, to encourage companies to share their data? I mean, do you think we need a role of policy? Do you think there is something that the companies should do themselves? Are there any ways you think that this kind of reluctance or can be basically removed somehow? Any kind of thoughts on how on sharing data among different partners? And finally, Evaristo, I mean, you mentioned a specific barrier regarding the tax requirements in your region, from what I understand, and how it became a barrier to basically implementing the circular economy practice. So I was wondering if you can actually elaborate a little bit of this, and if you have any key messages on how did you overcome this barrier, let's say, and how this could affect similar circular approaches in other regions as well. So maybe I start with Hannah and Karin. I don't know who would like to take the question.
I will start and maybe end up with Hannah. LCA, as a research institute, RISE often do a lot of life cycle assessment on different products, but this is always difficult to get the data because a lot of companies feel there is their private property, the data. So of course this is a problem. But if this is if it becomes a more general tool, maybe it's easier to sort of adapt to this and give out your data, or more general data. I mean, we see even in Sweden now, a lot of food chains have started their own apps or possible way of looking at food, how much climate change, the environmental impact in climate change they will affect. So, I mean, you can see the difference between two sausage or vegetables. You can see the difference where they come from and like this. So I think the more you're using the life cycle assessment, and this there is environmental product declaration now, I'm international, where you put up your LCA results. And I mean, if this is going to be more common, yeah, of course, people learn. So, I mean, it's easy with this, and also this label we have produced and developed in Circle Life is very good. And you can see the difference between, you need to be able to compare. That's the main thing. But the data will take time to convince people to give out. And I mean, communication, we saw everyone thinks it's important. I think maybe Hannah, how to communicate this life cycle assessment.
Well, maybe I can add that there's been a lot of discussions in the project of how do we communicate to users, and there we saw that, yeah, as I mentioned, that there's been different ways in the project. There's been, for example, a label for the sausage, as Karin said, eco-labeling, but there's also been for ONA, which has the life cycle assessment data available for the products on their webpage, whilst Cosnick used it as part of their information sheets in the project proposal to the wholesalers. So there's been different versions on how do you communicate it in the best way for those specific stakeholders. But as Karin said, I think it's been a lot of discussions also on how can we compare. So if a user sees some data or a result from an LCA, how do we know what is big and small? And I think that is still something that has to be worked on, and it also kind of relies on that we have more products that have a similar label, so that the customer can go into a shop and compare a lot of different products in the same way. So I think we have some work still to do that, to provide this kind of standardization for users.
Thank you both. Karen, I would love if you would like to go next.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Yeah, it's an interesting question. I don't know if I actually have the exact answer to that, but I can give you some examples of things that we've come across that I think maybe provide several insights, or not necessarily solutions, but yeah, definitely insights. So I think the first question would be to actually understand, one of the biggest questions is who is actually putting the equipment on the market. And that's one of the challenges, because we're talking about trying to identify producers is very challenging when it's maybe not an advanced economy, or maybe when it's not big brands, but it's importers on behalf of those brands. And I think this affects everything throughout the value chain. So maybe just coming back to kind of the question that you had, building on that point, I think a lot of the preference that we see when we speak to governments in Africa is like to have a government-led scheme, or government-led kind of financing or control of finances for e-waste management, if that's something that would be in their plan. So I think, having said that, in addition to that, actually, there's a lot of affiliated environmental funds that are usually administered by the Ministry of Environment or Ministry of Finance. And these are often preferred options as well. not necessarily schemes led by the private sector. So I think there's definitely room for policymakers and those, you know, from our part of the world as well, who've, you know, had experiences in this field as well, to really see whether there's a room for hybrid models, where you have, maybe you're tapping into environment investment funds administered by the government, plus you know, a scheme where you have import levy or the other financing options that I mentioned in my presentation. Because one of the big issues actually with the funds is that the funds accrued, the financing accrued from levies that are controlled by the government are often administered by let me say, regulation that's under the Ministry of Finance. So they don't look at it as an environmental issue, they look at it as a taxation issue. So the funds that are accrued are never really ring-fenced for e-waste management. They're usually just put into the general pot for taxation and for other economic spending. So I think just another item to consider as well is, as I said, I don't have the answer to your question, but I think I have lots of things for further discussion. Economies of scale, again, I mentioned this before from a recycling perspective, but I think that really is an incentive for, you know, PROs and to be set up, and or compliance schemes as such. So again, there are some countries that don't necessarily generate huge amounts. So is there really a need for a diverse landscape, as you referred to, that we have in Europe, where you might have 10 or 15 schemes competing in one country or whatever? I think, you know, that's another question to be considered. And then my final point is, it then lends itself to the fact that, is there an opportunity for regional harmonization? And that's what I also referred to in my presentation, where maybe you have such compliance schemes operating across borders, and that could, you know, potentially deal with the limited, the lower economies of scale in terms of feedstock, the recyclers, etc. So just some things to consider. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Garam. Ronya, please.
Yeah, also a really interesting question. For me, I think I grew up in a super collaborative environment, and I intuitively learned what it means to also be able to rely on others and not to have to do all the work on my own. And I really learned like how much things can inspire and spark if you don't do things on your own. So for me, it's always really hard to actually understand this protective approach, although I understand that companies have the feeling of having to protect their IP. But I think, like, as we can see from the open source movement, more and more people understand that actually collaborating will also help. And I think we have to promote more this, like, for me at the moment, it's all about opportunity cost somehow, because if you think of like how you can use user feedback when you have an open data and connection, then you save a lot of marketing budget, because you don't have to do all the research on your own, but you just get the feedback and all the ideas from your users immediately. And that, for example, like if you have this open conversation and are more open about what you're going to do, then people will also interact with you and give you information that you otherwise would have to pay for to get. And of course, that's again on the customer side, but I also think like for companies, I think standardization would be so helpful. And if there would be an agreement, maybe that's something that the politics should do more often, like helping industries or sectors to say like, we standardize that now, and that would also, I think, at least like help a little bit on like giving the assurance that we all develop something together, so no one is directly competing if you have a standard that you agreed on. But generally spoken, I think there are those examples of like how items are done in China, and then they are thrown in the market and they get back like a few months later and they were all hacked and invented. But this is like kind of R&D money that comes to you for free, or R&D work that comes for you to free. So I know that the way how businesses are done at the moment, it's hard to imagine, but I also can see that from people who promote open source and so on, that there are so many advantages actually being more open and collaboratively, that we just have to mainly switch our approach and our thinking towards it, I think. And then, of course, ideas like having protected blockchain information flows and so on could be also something to increase that trust in how my data is used, and that it's not used against me. So from a but then from the politics, I think there should be more enforcement of having people collaborate in whatever way, not to be too restrictive. And there is these ideas of, like, I'm not too deep into that, but there are those ideas of not promoting what is in, but just like saying what is not in a product and so on that could help.
Thank you. Perfect. Okay. Evaristo, insights on the tax challenges.
Yeah, I mean, policy usually comes after changes and developments in some cases, or in many cases, and this can produce that some initiatives regarding innovation can be refused by public administration due to tax restriction, and then we need policymakers ahead of the circular economy development to foster changes, to foster and to promote transformation of traditional economy business model to circular economy business model. I think policymakers and policies in general can transform or can help to transform the traditional way to a circular economy.
Okay, good. Thanks, Evaristo. I have one more round of questions, and maybe if you can all do this in like 2-3 minutes, we can finish perhaps on time. So maybe I start with Hannah and Karin, but that question is also for Evaristo, I think. So I guess you're aware that in the Circular Economy Action Plan, the Commission has indicated the possibility of introducing an EU-wide, basically, take-back scheme for electronics. Now, at Sec for Life, we actually developed such a scheme, of course, at a very small scale, based on intelligent bins, based on having a mobile phone app, on providing incentives for consumers. So it was like something in a way complete, let's say. So I was wondering, I mean, from the Sec for Life experience, I mean, what are the key messages we can actually convey? I mean, is this something that we think can be replicated to other countries and regions? I mean, if yes, under what conditions can it be successful? And also, do you think that such models, I mean, should have more regional presence, or do you think that they could be also applied at the European level? Or maybe there are too many complexities of doing something like this at the European level, at least the way we did the Sec for Life. So any insights on these domains? Now, Garam, I would like to ask you a question regarding the harmonization of definitions. And of course, you spoke about the definition of excessive producer responsibility and the need to harmonize them in Africa. And in Europe, we have definitions, including in piece of legislation. But if you allow me to expand a little bit beyond the discussion and definitions, around circularity, there are, especially because for electronics, we're talking about global supply chains, there are many things that the global definitions do not exist yet. For example, what is a refurbished product can mean a different thing in one country than another. What is really a circular economy process? I mean, who is responsible for the end product in some cases? And certainly for when we speak about global value chains and for electronics, we have global supply chains. There is this kind of, let's say, concern or need to have more harmonization of approaches. Now, I'm not sure if this is exactly your area of expertise, but I was wondering if we are to go through a more harmonizing approach, who should play the role, let's say, in harmonizing this definition? I mean, do you think that there is a role for the UN? Do you think that, for example, the Global Circular Economy Alliance that the European Commission launched together with the UN, that would be also a forum such discussions. But you know, I was wondering then who's going to develop the more concrete definitions that could be applied. So I don't know if you have any insights on this, taking into account, of course, that electronics is not just an issue for Africa or Europe. Now, Ronya, I mean, yeah, I think I like very much your slide explaining that modularity does not always translate to lower environmental footprint, and that's, I guess, if this is that side that what evidence show, this is something that should be taken into account. Now the question is, there is this debate, as you know, in Europe, you know, we should have more modular device, but then there are also voices that claim that the device should be slimmer, and that maybe comes at the expense of modularity. Now I know you don't have the answer of this yet, but I understand that there are many conditions for one option over the other to be more sustainable. So, and then I was wondering, what do you think should come from a European policy kind of perspective? Do you think we need a framework of eco-design that allows these options or leaves these options open, or you are more in favor of having more stricter approaches because there are views of stakeholders that we should have strict eco-design requirements that support modularity? But then the question is whether this comes with a positive environmental footprint. Yeah, so maybe we start with Hannah and Karen. As I said, maybe you can do this in like 2 minutes. So that would be great. Yeah.
Yes, but I think Hannah and I both think this is more Evaristo's knowledge is gained here. We send the question to him because it's very little time left.
Yeah. Thank you, Karin. Of course, can be replicate the experience here in Spain to other regions in Europe and in other regions around the world, but it needs public support, public administration to be involved, to be on board. The whole value chain, the whole stakeholders needs to collaborate, and finally to get funds or investment for the collection networks, because intelligent bins are not cheap. You also need an IT platform and an app behind the system to manage all the data, all the traceability. So it can be replicated, but it needs the collaboration of all the stakeholders.
Perfect, thank you. Garan, would you like to go next?
Yes, thanks. I think so. This is a question I've heard before. This is a discussion that actually took place in the Circular Electronics Partnership at one point. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's another circular economy partnership. But I think just to point one thing out, from my opinion, my personal opinion, this is a conversation who is responsible for global EPR or setting that up. I think that that should be something that's done at a regional level. So, for example, if you look at the European Union, then you have maybe an equivalent across Africa. So let's look at the African Union or African Free Trade Agreement or something like this. And then the same in Asia Pacific, the same as in the Americas. I think it's up to these regional entities. Which one, I'm not sure. Which one has the right power, I'm not sure. But these regional entities have a conversation with one another about this, rather than one entity to look at it globally. And I think at the same time, in parallel, national governments must increase their regulatory means to manage e-waste under EPR, so that can keep pace with any new or global or regional harmonization discussions.
Thank you, Garam. Ronya.
Yeah, so I wouldn't want to be a policymaker at the moment neither, because it's so hard to take those decisions. But I can see that giving too strict regulations doesn't always help. So the famous rebound effect of the screens that were reduced in that were more efficient, but then grew, and all the reduction was eaten up. And I think the most important fact is to understand, on the one hand, how much technical innovation is going to happen within the next decade or whatever is the time frame, to understand what are the objectives. Are we going for longevity? Are we going for repairability, upgradability? And then the other thing is also business models can actually interfere with objectives. So if I want to have a product that is be shareable, it needs to be more durable. And more durable might need different design, a bit more material than going for lightweight. So if, for example, in the household applications, we see a lot of going for lightweight only, but that's not always helpful. If I want to do a durable product that is to sustain for a long time, then maybe I need a little bit more material, which is in the end way more environmentally friendly, although the emissions from the material side are a little bit higher. So it's really about understanding. It's more giving a framework, understanding like what is the business model objective, and understanding where can I really save a lot of emissions. And that's not necessarily in the production. That's somewhere else. That can be external facts or scope 3 facts or how you count it in. And then making this visible and helping people to really take the best decisions towards that would be like more of a framework that I would opt for.
Thank you, Ronya. And yeah, I think we are right on time. But before we close, I mean, I know that we have, as you saw in the chat box, we have an illustrator who has tried to present in illustration the key topics from the key issues discussed today. I don't know, Izzy, if we can show them for just a few seconds. Yeah. Okay, that probably refers to the presentation of Arnoldas Milgas. Okay, and that's the panel discussion. Okay, I think most of the points are there, and maybe we can use it for the summary we're going to prepare. Okay, excellent. No, I mean, yeah, this was very useful, and as I said, we can use it later as well. So first of all, I would just like to thank all the panelists, all the 5 speakers for being with us today. 2 hours, it was long, but a lot of very interesting issues discussed, which I'm not going to summarize now, but there will be a summary of the event, a short summary that will be published on the Hopin platform together with the presentations. And you will receive a link for this platform later. They will also be posted, of course, on the Sec4Life website, and you can use, by the way, you can Google sec4life.eu to really find out more about what Sec4Life has achieved. And there are really lots of deliverables and reports. I see Professor looking at me. Certainly, there's a lot of work that has been done the past 4 years. And technical work, but also policy-related work that you can have a look and explore what we have actually achieved. This is not, of course, the end, because tomorrow we have at the same time a discussion focusing on the agri-food value chain. So I guess some of the issues might arise again tomorrow, but yeah, let's see how different the challenges are going to be in practice. So I would like to thank really all of you for taking the time to be here, also the participants. And yeah, I mean, I hope we stay in touch and we continue these discussions in the future. Thank you
so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.